Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and in this video we shall be reviewing the second game in the Kirby series, and the first game on a home console, Kirby's Adventure, or as it's known in Japan as Kirby of the Stars, the Fountain of Dreams, a groundbreaking game that implemented many aspects that would become standard for the series. But does it still hold up, or does its age render it obsolete? Join me and find out. Despite the overwhelming success for Kirby's Dream Land, Kirby's Adventure's development was a turbulent one as HAL Laboratory was on the verge of bankruptcy and hoped for a quick surge of profits to help salvage their company, and so turned to Sakurai in order to create a sequel to a successful Game Boy game, Kirby's Dream Land, for the NES. The decision to do an NES game instead of the newly released SNES game was because it would take too many resources at the time for the struggling company to set up a dev environment for the SNES, let alone actually make a game for the system. Right off the bat, this caused issues as the older console was already known for games that were made for veteran players, and Sakurai would have rather done something for the more fresh audience of the SNES. In order to mitigate this, he implemented the copy abilities as well as generally designing the game around the concept of being for both the new and veteran players. Originally conceptualized as a Kirby using enemies, and they eventually ended up conceptualizing around 40 abilities. Many of these would be scrapped as they were eventually whittled down to the final 25. Some of these scrapped ideas would later be reincorporated as future abilities. Kick would become Fighter in Kirby Superstar, Shrink would become Mini in Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. In fact, the game still has unused sprites for that ability, and Animal, eventually became the Animal ability in Kirby Squeak Squad. Others became lost to time, like Make Blocks, Riding a Rocket, or Trap. Other developmental decisions were done to please new players, like the addition of subgames, made in such a way to use a single button that new players could enjoy, while veterans could skip them if they so desired. 4 concepts were proposed. Should you press the button or not? Press the button with right timing, press the button first, and press the button the most times in a time limit. The first 3 became the subgames Egg Catcher, Crane Fever, and Quick Draw, while the 4th one was ultimately cut. A challenge that Sakurai faced was that Kirby's actual pixel size did not change between versions, making him appear much smaller on the screen and could easily fly over all the obstacles and enemies that were in the level due to the great amount of space. After briefly considering outright removing his iconic flight ability in its entirety, Sakurai decided instead to implement an information panel at the bottom of the screen, which would show these sort of humorous pictures of the abilities and Kirby being in a cannon, though this ended up going unused in the American release, funny enough. He also decreased Kirby's flight speed and had mini-bosses and bosses fighting in closed spaces where Kirby couldn't easily dodge them. Interestingly, there were also plans for these sortable, cuttable rope platform concepts that wouldn't appear until Kirby Superstar, which is interesting that they conceptualized this so early on. Other things became codified during this game's development. The Maxim tomato, did you know, was originally meant to be a bag of magic food, but the English game manual, remember when games had manuals, misinterpreted the sprite as a magic tomato, and this game confirmed it. Kirby's color was also fully decided upon. Indeed, if you remember back in the first game, Kirby was white in the American box cover. This was due to an argument between Sakurai and Miyamoto. Sakurai thought Kirby should be pink, while Miyamoto thought Kirby instead should be yellow. It wasn't decided in time for the first game's North American release, so Nintendo of America just left him a ghostly white. Luckily, Adventure solidly established him as pink, which frankly I think was a good decision, as if he had been yellow, I think it would have resembled too much Pac-Man, possibly causing legal issues, which, let's be frank, they couldn't really afford at the moment. The development team was luckily larger this time around, with Satoru Iwata, Masahiro Sakurai, and Jun Ishikawa returning. We also saw the arrival of Kirby longtime contributors like the sound composer Hikozuko Ando and the enigmatic Shinichi Shinamura. In the end, it would get released on March 23rd, 1993 in Japan, then on May 1st, 1993 in America, and December 1st in the EU and Australia. It did decently well, selling 1.75 million copies. This lower sales number was likely due to its release on the console compared to the Game Boy, which was just a massive success compared to even the NES. But now that we've covered the development and release of this game, let's talk about the plot, which is slightly more substantive this time around. Alright, so this game begins as Kirby wakes up from one of his common naps, but is horrified upon realizing that he hadn't gotten a pleasant dream all night. Deciding to investigate, he goes to the Fountain of Dreams, which is the source of the restful and pleasant dreams of the planet, to see what exactly is going on here. He is horrified to see the king has turned the Fountain of Dreams into his own personal bathtub and broken the star rod into 7 pieces, giving 6 to his allies, which include the returning Wispy Woods and Krakow, and newcomers like Paint Roller, Mr. Shine and Mr. Bright, the mighty mechanical Heavy Mole, and the masked swordsman Meta Knight. The king tries to explain himself, but Kirby, not wanting to hear any of it, storms off to regain those pieces by going through 7 wards and, reclaiming them. The king tries to stop him by doing one last fight, but in the end Kirby beats him and restores the Fountain of Dreams despite DDD desperately trying to dissuade him not to. All seems fine at first, but then the mysterious evil entity known as Nightmare emerges and shrouds Dreamland in darkness. It's revealed that the king had known Nightmare had infected the fountain, and thus he had decided to break the Star Rod to trap the evil entity in the inert spring water. Which makes me wonder if Nightmare was forced to watch the king bathe naked in the thing, Because of his miscommunication and Kirby's stubbornness, Nightmare is released, and the king sucks him up and the Star Rod, and spats the 2 of them in the atmosphere, where they confront Nightmare's first form, before the pair battle it out on the moon, where Kirby defeats the Dark Lord, leading to a horrifying death as he explodes in a massive explosion on the moon, which just leaves it a crescent, and so Kirby returns the Star Rod to its rightful place atop the Fountains of Dreams, returning the good dreams to the people of Dreamland and reconciling with King Deity, who in the end just wanted to do what was right. So yeah, it's definitely a bit more complex than the last one, but I don't think it's really that negative. Honestly, it seems like a natural evolution for a slightly more ambitious game to have a more ambitious storyline. It also introduced the recurring story concept of the true final boss not being King Dedede, but rather being some sort of eldritch abomination. Even if compared to later ones, Nightmare is not exactly that alien. I mean, he kind of looks like Waluigi, to be honest. King Dedede, while I enjoy nearly all of his fights in the series, is simply not that intimidating compared to like Bowser, Ganon, K. Rool, even Dr. Wily. So, in order to give a sense of seriousness, it kind of becomes necessary to introduce a new entity in its entirety. But now that we've covered the game's plot, let's cover what is probably the most important part to any game: the gameplay. The basic gameplay tenets are the same from the last game. You got right to left buttons to cause him to walk right or left. Pressing A causes you to jump. Pressing up causes you to puff up and float around or enter a door. Though I should be stressed, he does fly slower in this game, which is understandable. You also inhale by pressing B and spit by pressing B again when something is in his mouth. If you press the down button, he squats, or if there is something in his mouth, he swallows. New nuances to this basic gameplay include the ability to climb ladders using the up arrow. You can slide by pressing down, and in addition to the A or B button, you can also run by pressing left or right twice, which causes him to move faster. It's a neat addition that gives the game a slightly brisker pace, but I'd suggest you be careful as you can actually get into a lot of trouble if you run into stuff, so take your time and you won't walk into anything. The game also officially introduced the concept of swimming. While technically water was present for like two rooms in the first game, it was more like a jumping in low gravity. This game actually made its own thing with its own animation and also the fact that certain abilities can't be used underwater. Speaking of which, however, we all know the gameplay change that this game introduced that is the most significant. If Kirby inhales certain enemies and swallows them, he gets an ability. Once you get this ability, you can either press the B button to activate it or press select to drop it. In fact, you can drop abilities really easily. Too easily, in fact. All it takes is one hit and you can lose, and that can be a little annoying. And yeah, they're simple one-move abilities for the most part. Those in future games have a lot more nuance, and sadly, these for the most part don't really have that. But despite that, I still think they're quite enjoyable, though not to the same level, and frankly, getting hit can be a little annoying. Starting with the genuinely amazing ones, Fire Kirby is basically a flamethrower. Nothing can go wrong with that. Beam Kirby fires a wave beam that has excellent coverage. Laser shoots a laser that can bounce off the walls. Spark generates a electric field around Kirby, which is good coverage again. Wheel is neat and turns him into a wheel, though be wary of certain stage hazards. Stone turns him into a stone block that can kill enemies and pound into the ground to reveal goodies. Certain things. Sadly, it doesn't have all those neat cameos that later games introduced. There's also one of the most damaging abilities, which is Hammer, which, well, gives Kirby a hammer and is one of the few that still work underwater. So does the next ability, Sword. Sword is, well, Kirby wielding a sword, pretty good. Cutter sees him toss boomerangs that are swords that cut enemies. Paracel is one that I at first thought little of, though revisiting this game for this review, I found it somewhat good as it blocks falling objects such as they were turning exploding coconuts, and allows one to slowly float down. It can be useful underwater, so it has quite a bit of utility, and I think it's underrated. Then there is the UFO ability, which is OP as heck, combining the beam ability and the laser ability, plus a charged beam that can be used by pressing B and holding it for a time. Understandably, it's pretty rare and can only be found in a few regions. Ice can be used to freeze enemies via his breath attack. Then you have two screen nukes, Crash, which is the most powerful ability, and Mike Kirby, which proves that Kirby can't sing and is slightly less powerful, but it can be used to a total of 3 times. The next two abilities are a little complex, yet have sadly become forgotten by time. Backdrop allows Kirby to slam enemies into the ground in 4 different ways, and Throw allows Kirby to grab and then throw enemies at an angle. Both of these abilities would later be combined into the single ability Suplex, though I have to admit I like the Backdrop name more. Other abilities have since been subsumed into the increasingly complex abilities in future games. These include Burning, referred to as Fireball in this game, which allows Kirby to turn into a fireball and shoot forwards. And then there's Freeze, which sees Kirby surround himself in an aurora of cold like Spark. Both are fine abilities on their own, but I can kind of understand why they've been forgotten. Though I should be stressing that Burning does make a few more appearances in the future, as unlike Freeze, it doesn't quite become absorbed as soon. Some, however, were just bad, to be honest. With Tornado, Kirby rotates like a tornado. It's okay against certain mini bosses, but is too awkward to regularly use in combat. High Jump lets Kirby leap into a high jump, damaging enemies in the ascent. It's okay against Krakow, but really in any other context is too awkward to use well. Needle Kirby is pretty well defended, but I must say it renders Kirby immobile, which to me doesn't really work with the flow of the game and is poorly suited for really any boss or mini boss. All three would get much better revitalizations in future games, though in this game they're pretty basic. However, the last 3 abilities, just trash. Sleep Kirby is kind of a joke. He falls asleep for a short moment before waking up. It's returned in this series again and again. It's mostly the same, though it may restore some health in some games. Not always, though, and usually it's just a waste of time. Ball Kirby is just awful, again, to control, and sadly never gets better, and even in this game is just wretched. You become Ball. It's just horrible. Though, interestingly enough, I guess you could say he gets a return in any future games for Kirby is ball shaped, but I don't know. Yet below even that is Light. Light is the worst copy ability in this game, no, the series. It sees Kirby launch a beacon into the air and light a dim room just once and cannot be used to even attack enemies as it's purely utilitarian. Sounds almost worthless, but surely it must be common, as surely there's a lot of dim rooms in Kirby Adventure, right? Nah, there's like 3. I might have been missed a few, but whatever. Just the absolute worst ability in the series. Just completely worthless. And while it would be kind of neat to see how they revitalize it, I don't know how they could, honestly. Light overlaps with so many other abilities that I can't really think of a way of having it be interesting. All in all, though, despite a few stinkers, Kirby's Adventure inclusion of copy abilities gives the game an increased level of replayability. In terms of items, the Maxim Tomatoes, energy drinks, and Invincible Candy all return in this game and function basically the same. Other minor additions to gameplay include the form of devices, such as stakes, which can be activated by either hammer or stone, and metal blocks that are, well, blocks made out of metal that can only be destroyed by some powerful abilities like burning, fire, throw, rock, or UFO's piercing beam. There's also these cannons which have a fuse that are lit by abilities like laser, flame, and burning. Most of these honestly just serve as methods to get goodies like extra lives or those big switches which unlock additional things on the hub. Speaking of that, let's transition to that now, though it should be said that the first 2 worlds lack any such switches, so don't worry about it until the 3rd world. Kirby's Adventure is a much larger game. Instead of going through stage after stage, we see a series of hub-worlds for each level, which contain anywhere from 5 to 7 stages, as well as some additional bonus rooms. These include museums, which for this game and its remake are unique and have a pair or singular enemy that gives Kirby a copy ability. Then there are the arenas. Yes, plural. Don't worry though, they're not boss ring matches, just chances to battle mini bosses and get powerful abilities like Hammer. There are also the subgames, also called minigames. Three in this game. First is Crane Fever, where you basically do a simulated crane game where you gotta time your button presses to grab a Kirby doll and then release it at the right time to earn some one-ups. Egg Catcher sees him eating eggs while not eating bombs tossed by the King Deity. And it's pretty fun and was even featured in Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe. Then, last but not least, there's Quick Draw, which sees Kirby in Western garb beating a series of opponents by pressing the button faster than the opponent. All are really fun, challenging, and worth playing. But now, let us go to the visuals of the game, how it looks and such. In terms of graphics, it is still an 8-bit game like the last one, but the addition of both color and increased memory of the NES compared to that of the Game Boy still makes it seem so much livelier. Kirby's pink now, except when he has a copy ability, which sees him become peach color, or in the case of Iced and Freeze, blue. Each of the 7 worlds has a unique aesthetic and standout moments. There's, of course, Vegetable Valley, which is, your typical forest/grassy hills type area, but it also has the series' first Howl Room, which is an ongoing tradition where there are these hidden rooms that have blocks that spell out the word Howl. Ice Cream Island is a tropical island with more environmental hazards and more bottomless pits, though they're filled with water, so it's not quite that hard to not fall into them. Butter Building is a tall tower that shows off some really astounding graphics for an 8-bit game, as we see the tower rotate as Kirby walks around its exterior, which is pretty neat. Grape Garden has a very cloudy appearance and a large number of those annoying Scarfies. Yogurt Yard features a lot of slopes and interior sections that are cramped and force Kirby to face enemies in close quarters, with even more open areas being filled to the brim with multitudes of all sorts of obstacles. Orange Ocean, in addition to having beautiful aesthetics, has a nice variety of level tropes, including a lot of swimming areas, shipyards, and even a few icebergs. And each level has a hidden big switch, so exploration is really rewarded here, and is arguably the hardest level in the game. And finally, Rainbow Resort. While it not only gave its name to a famous Kirby website back in the day, but also features, if not necessarily harder levels than Orange Ocean, but a lot of more experimental levels, like a mini-boss tower that sees Kirby fighting mini-bosses. In fact, there are 2 routes. One is shorter but has harder fights to make up for it. There's even a level that serves as a callback to Kirby's Dream Land. Must have been one of the last stages designed, as it seems a little early to be referencing a previous game unless they were strapped for time. All in all of these worlds are amazing. And another piece of trivia is that the names of the worlds spell Roigibiv backward, which is an acronym for the rainbow backwards. And the backgrounds and designs of these levels are just a step up in every way from the last game and give so many vistas that just look beautiful and really push the console to its limits, which sadly leads to a lot of sprite flickering and slowdown on original hardware, which can look a bit ugly. Overall, though, I still think it looks amazing for an NES game, which just goes to show what happens when you wait till late in a console's life to make a game. Going to the audio, with regards to how the game sounds, it is truly great. The title theme is more lively and developed than that of the original game, with a 4x4 time that is a G flat slash F major opening with a Mimsky pickup going into a jolly melody. Vegetable Valley's theme is a very lively theme that has a B major, while the underground stage theme sounds like bar music. Forest stage theme is very slow but militaristic tone that gives off a marching vibe and gets you pumped to go through these levels. Ice Cream Island's theme really succeeds in giving off a sweet vibe feeling of tropical bliss and ice cream deliciousness of life. Butter Building's theme, however, is just tubular, starting with a 4x4 E major and a scarce usage of its tonic. No wonder that it has returned so very often in the series. Unfortunately, the music doesn't always land, as Grape Garden's theme is a bit too slow for my taste, but it's still fine elevator music, I guess. The mountain stage theme in Yogurt Yard really makes you pumped to climb some slopes. Orange Ocean theme is an accurate combination of Polynesian tunes and happy birthday feelings. Rainbow Resort's theme has a rather soothing combination of a soft 6x8 bass signature with a higher pitched series of boops that leads to a genuinely well done song. The boss theme song blows the one from Kirby's Dream Land out of the water. Really gets you pumped to kill someone. The best music in the game has to be for the final boss theme where you fight Nightmare. The theme opens with a sinister forebodingness, like things are getting serious, before ricocheting up into a genuinely amazing theme that pumps you up to fight the final boss. Overall, while perhaps not as iconic as the music of the first game, I think in some cases the Kirby Adventure soundtrack is superior, if not more varied at the very least. Now let's go to the many foes Kirby must face to get victory in his goals in this game. Now, many enemies from the first game return basically unchanged for the sequel. There's Waddle Dees, Blippers, Bronto Birds, Cappies, Exploding Coconuts, Coners, Glunk, Gordo, Kaboo, Poppy Bro Jr., Squishy, Twizzy, Shotzo, Scarfy, and Broom Hatter, who I sadly forgot about in my review of Kirby's Dream Land. I apologize for that. Basically, she just waddles around and sweeps the floor. Kinda boring, and it's understandable as to why I overlooked her before, but she's back. Other returning enemies were given new copy abilities, including Waddle Doos, which give Kirby the amazing beam ability. There's Sir Kibble, who now gives the cutter ability. There's also the new variants of Parasail Waddle Dees and Waddle Doos that are just the old enemies with parasails that cause them to give the Parasail ability. In terms of new foes, there is Slippy the Frog, which no doubt is going to annoy some Star Fox fans, but are generally easy enemies that can both hop on land and swim in the water in a bobbing motion. Then there is Bounder, another copy ability-less enemy that resembles a toddler. It's not that notable, except for the fact that it is one of only 4 enemies in the franchise to be outright replaced for unknown reasons. The other new enemies are a little more notable due to possessing abilities that led to them in many cases returning in many future games. Sword Knight and Blade Knight both give sword and are both very neat in terms of design. I prefer Sword Knight with its xenomorph-like helmet, but Blade Knight is cool too. Both were quite prominent in the anime. Chili the Snowman gives the freeze ability. Later games would see him give ice, but in this game, instead it's given by the penguin Pingui, who has sadly been mostly forgotten as Chili took his role as the ice enemy. Rocky is a walking rock and often situates himself in such a manner to allow him to fall on Kirby. Sparky is a green blob that gives spark. Wheelie is a wheel. Twister is this strange spinning top type enemy that gives the ability Tornado. Bomber is a bomb with a skull in it that gives Crash, which is a pretty powerful ability. The UFO, yes, that its name, is a very rare enemy that appears infrequently in the game and is very hard to get most of the time, which makes sense as the UFO ability is OP. Laser Ball is frankly a rather generic orange ball that shoots lasers. And Naughty has a neat design, even if the ability it gives is worthless, that being sleep. Hothead gives Kirby fire and has a head on fire. Flamer is a burning eye like a biblically accurate angel that gives the burning ability. Unlike Pingy, though, the fusion of burning and fire has not ended its appearances and has become a mainstay in the games ever since. Togizo is a spinious enemy that, again, was one of the few enemies replaced in the franchise by Needless. A slightly visually more unique caterpillar type design. Shame that he's been forgotten though, as I do like the Togizo design just a bit more. Starman is, which, yes, is a Super Mario reference, has a pretty good design despite giving the mediocre high jump ability. And he's kinda cool, he looks like a superhero that's Patrick. Sadly, the last two common enemies are as trash as the abilities they give. First, there is Bubbles, which is a spherical enemy that gives the ball ability, and strangely enough, returned in Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe. And then there's Cool Spook, which is inspired by the Teru Teru Bozu dolls in Japanese culture. Despite having a neat design, it only appears in a few rooms and has been utterly forgotten, which is a fitting fate for it. Now let's go to something a bit more substantive, the mini-bosses of the game. I think it would be a good transition between the common enemies and mini-bosses to start with the Meta Knights. They are a gang of warriors led by Meta Knight who six them on Kirby as a mini-boss type encounter. Defeat one of them and the health bar goes down as another one is summoned. It's pretty neat, sort of like a gang rush. There are four types of knight. Axe Knight is a skull-headed Viking that will either swing its axe forwards or toss it like a boomerang depending on where Kirby is located. Javelin Knight is a robotic floating octopus thing that jumps and will either toss the javelin at Kirby or spin it around wildly. Mace Knight is a burly fellow who wields a giant ball and chain that can spin it around its head and toss it at Kirby. The mace itself can block many of Kirby's attack, which can be annoying when he runs around. The last but not least of these knights is Trident Knight, which throws electric tridents at Kirby. Overall, they're a fun, unique challenge that stands out in the cast of antagonists. But now let's go on to the more traditional mini-bosses, starting with the sole returning one, Poppy Bros Sr. He's mostly unchanged, but is more likely to jump and attack from the other side. You can also fight two at once in Grape Garden and Orange Ocean, which can be a bit challenging. However, the new guys are all, for the most part, pretty neat. First is Bugsy, who will leap towards Kirby to try and grab him, from which, if he is successful, he will then perform a suplex-type attack upon Kirby. He will also hover towards Kirby on occasion, ensnaring him if he gets too close. He will also summon a pair of Ladybug-type Bugsy Jr. enemies that Kirby can suck up and spit out at Bugsy. It's a good fight that offers a decent challenge. Then there is the Grand Wheelie, which is a giant wheelie that has a pretty basic design and basically rolls back and forth, releasing a smaller wheelie at Kirby, which for some reason doesn't give Kirby the wheel ability even though they're basically just wheelies, and just serve as something that Kirby can suck up and spit out. Honestly, it's the weakest of the new ones. It's a pretty simple fight, though it does give a fun ability, so I'm a bit more forgiving. The same is not true of Mr. Tick-Tock, who, when he's not stealing teenager social security numbers on an app, will attack Kirby by stomping around and emitting literal notes at Kirby, who can spit them out back at him. He gives the mic ability, so it's a bit above a Grand Wheelie in terms of its fight, though it is very simple. Then there is Fire Lion, who is this frankly fairly normal looking lion who will either start slashing at Kirby, pouncing towards him, turn into a burning fireball, or jumping at him. He gives the burning ability, and honestly is a pretty good fight, but is pretty rare, and he will get a really well made upgrade, visually speaking, in later games. Then there is Rolling Turtle, which is a bipedal buck-toothed turtle that will roll at Kirby, and if it touches him, will grab him and throw him around. There's also a second, faster red recolor variant that shows up in the mini boss tower. He'll toss smaller turtles at Kirby as well, which Kirby can suck up and spit back out at him. I didn't really like the design, but sadly, this is the only mini boss to ever be replaced, in this case by the Elephantine Fan, and while I like elephants, it's a shame that Rolling Turtle got the axe, as I think he would have been a genuinely fun fight in future games. However, the last two mini-bosses have managed to become mainstays. Mr. Frosty is a white walrus who will try to swallow Kirby or summon ice blocks to kick at him, which Kirby can suck up and spit him out. He'll also try to tackle the pink puffball. Pretty easy, one of the easiest boss fights, but was enough of a challenge not to be abandoned like Grand Wheelie, and is returned often in the series. Oh, but the best mini-boss has to be Bonkers. This massive gorilla troll type creature will try to hit Kirby with his hammer, leap around, and toss exploding coconuts in random numbers, speed, and occurrence. He is honestly a great mini-boss that is nice to see return again and again. But now let's go to the big boys, the true bosses. Wispy Woods is back and is basically the same, but with a possession of copy abilities, he's a total pushover. I mean, really, it's like fighting an actual tree at this point. Krako also returns, starting in his junior form, where Kirby just has to avoid him as he's invincible until he reaches the top of the arena, where he matures into his adult form, and functions largely the same as before, though with him releasing Starman instead of Wild Ooze, and the presence of copy abilities does make it a bit easier than first time, but nowhere near to the extent of Wispy Woods. Both are nice to see return. However, I do think the presence of copy abilities makes one of them a pushover. But now let's see the new guys, and man, they're all pretty good. First, you got Paint Roller, which is an orange painter with roller skates that goes between various paint canvases in the arena and paints things that then come to life and attack Kirby. Most of these grant copy abilities that can be used to attack him, though not all of them. You got a fake Kirby and Waddle Dee that don't give an ability and just sort of walk in the general direction of Kirby and collide into him for damage. But they're easy to suck up and spit back out of him. Then there's a baseball that flies at Kirby and gives him the ball ability, which, blah, that copy ability is trash. It's better to just spit it back out of him. Then there's a car that gives the wheel ability, which is pretty useful. There's a cloud that shoots lightning, which will give spark, a parasail that chases after Kirby and gives the parasail ability, a bomb that gives crash, which that'll be very useful, and a microphone that gives the mic ability. The randomized attacks and sleek design lead to Paint Roller having an amazing boss fight that's really enjoyable. Then you got Mr. Bright and Mr. Shine, which are a tag team which, gang up against Kirby. Each has half the life bar, and depending on who is knocked out first, the other goes into the air and attacks Kirby. The time of day also changes depending on who's in the air. Mr. Shine throws golden boomerangs at Kirby and rolls 4 force into him, which ironically, it's you can actually just dodge the golden boomerangs by just ducking. While in the air, he'll throw down shooting stars at Kirby and make it night. Mr. Bright launches large fireballs and surrounds himself in fire and charges at Kirby, and they're a lot harder to dodge. While in the sky, he'll unleash a powerful flaming column of energy that is a little easier to dodge, frankly, and it becomes day when he's in the sky. Then there is Heavy Mole, this golden giant cyclops robot digging machine that burrows through the ground with a pair of red arms. Kirby must follow him and suck up the drill balls that he shoots out. The yellow one gives hammer, which is a good ability for the fight. Beware though, the red ones cause sleep, which can get you crushed by the terrain, which is not good. And you have to be careful because you can easily get crushed. Overall, a good fight, which, while not the hardest, is not a complete pushover due to how the level scrolls, and I think it's a real shame he's never really returned in a more modern game. However, no boss fight introduced in this game has had quite the impact on the series as Meta Knight. This dude is neat. We've seen him multiple occasions prior to his fight, both helping Kirby and sicken his minions on the baby. Unlike other foes, he even gives Kirby a sword and will not fight him until Kirby picks it up, meaning that if you have to go to the bathroom or do anything before you fight this boss, you can do it, and he'll just stand there with honor. From there, the pair duel swords. While he's not nearly as complex as in later games, and he does have some relatively easy to dodge attacks, it's not a complete pushover, as you can only harm him from behind or when he lets his guard down, which is very rare. Upon beating him, however, his mask breaks, revealing that he has a Kirby-like face, indicating that the two are the same species, and embarrassed he flees. The pre-ultimate boss fight is King Deity, who is, well, basically the same fight as before but in color, but that's fine because the original fight was amazing. The one new addition to this is that now the king can hover like Kirby, which he somehow taught himself to do after being defeated by Kirby last time. Overall, a good fight, maybe not the most unique, but I think that it is truly not necessary to change something if it works well enough. And besides, I think the addition of color and the minor addition to gameplay means that it still stands out. It's pretty fun. But honestly, the best boss fight in the game, and frankly, best enemy, has to be Nightmare. It consists of two forms, which one must fight with the Star Rod, which is technically a copy ability, but since it's only available in the final boss, I really don't consider it a true one. In terms of gameplay, it's basically sword, but it shoots star bullets as well. Neat design though. The first phase sees Nightmare in his star-covered orb form and Kirby fighting as the two slowly float down in the atmosphere. There's actually a time limit. Take too long and you crash into the ground and die. He'll shoot a volley of stars at Kirby, which you have to dodge and shoot him at it. It's really cinematic and it's kinda basically a shooter game at this point. We then go to the second form, which is that of a wizard on the surface of the moon. Though, honestly, kinda just looks like Waluigi. He teleports around, flying in the arena, and occasionally shooting stars at Kirby, which are relatively easy to dodge, a lot more so than his teleportation. One must hit the tornado that is his body to actually damage him. The constantly moving backgrounds, combined with his general Dark Lord vibes, stands out from the rest of Kirby's Rogue Gallery in all honesty, and I always wish that he would return to a mainline game. Dark Matter is cool. Oh, trust me, I know. Especially the swordsman, but I think this guy just has a different feel and could really be his own thing for once. He definitely is a great fight and is more of a threat compared to his fight in the anime, but we'll get to that eventually. Now let's discuss the game's completion requirements and my final thoughts. In order to complete this game, you have to finish the whole game and find all the big switches hidden throughout the stages. Interestingly, your title on the save file changes as your percentage increases. 1 to 9% is Water Drop, 10 to 19% is Son of Wind, 20 to 29% is Little Traveler, 30 to 39% is Swift Hunter, 40 to 49% is Star Herald, 50 to 59% is Dream Hunter, 60 to 69% is Dream Warrior, 70 to 79 is Star General, 80 to 89% means Great Ace, 90 to 99 means Final Star, and 100% means you are a hero of lore and unlock the Boss Rush and Extra Game. Boss Rush is pretty self-explanatory. It's a boss rush. You have to beat all the bosses in one health bar. When it comes to extra game, don't get too excited. Unlike Kirby's Dream Land, the extra game doesn't change nearly as much. You just have half the health and no saving. It's harder to obtain extra 1-ups too, as all the minigames are set to their hardest difficulty right from the jump. There's no unique enemies or boss patterns, sadly. I don't know if this was due to the memory limitations or the rush development of Kirby's Adventure, and it's a darn shame as I can see that there are some hints as what could have been. There are multiple recolors of enemies that really serve no purpose except to take up more memory and seem like they would make more sense in an extra game, and Sword Knight and Blade Knight seem like they were meant to be like that, like one's meant to be the replace for the other. I don't know though. Upon beating the extra game, you unlock the sound test and the title Superstar, and you have 100% completed the game. Is it worth it? Yeah, I'm going to say yeah. It's not nearly as rewarding as that in the original game, but I think that by going after the extra game, you get more enjoyment for your buck. And yeah. But as for my final thoughts about the game, well, honestly, given that I actually didn't grow up with this game, I think that I can give a little more nuance than on average. And honestly, I think the game was pretty good. It was a step up from the first game in nearly every way. It had better graphics, better story, better variety of bosses, mini bosses, and enemies. The introduction of copy abilities really increased replayability, even if a handful were not all that good. And they are a bit simple compared to future games, which is something I think you should take note of. While this is the first game to have copy abilities, they're not really in their final form. Future games will continue to evolve them forwards. It also established many things that would become standard, not just, obvious, abilities, but also stuff like boss rushes, Meta Knight. There's also the end stage games where you have to press a button at the right time to get an extra life or bonus points. Mini boss towers, the varied musical aesthetics that would return game after game. Sadly, some stuff like the extra game are a step back, and if you like the extra game, I'm sorry to say they won't really become good again until Kirby's Return to Dreamland in 2011. Still, even for its flaws, I recommend you play it, either on the original NES or the 2002 remake for the Game Boy Advance, Kirby's Nightmare Dreamland, which will be reviewed in time with all its upgrades covered when we get to that. There were a lot of other releases as well. There was the Virtual Console release for the Wii in February 2007. It was also playable in the Kirby's Dream Collection Special Edition released for the Wii in 2012. There was the Wii U Virtual Console version, which was released in April 2013, and for the Nintendo Switch Online services for February 2019. It also had a release for the Nintendo 3DS Classic series, where it's not just a simple emulation, but a complete recreation with no more sprite flickering or slowdown. And Mike works a little bit more like it does in later games, and it has some neat special 3D effects. I really think that's the best option in terms of playing that game if you want to get it cheap. And it was also released for the NES Classic Edition, but, chances are you probably won't be able to get that. But with so many options for your very desires, it's very easy to get this game, I think. Or I guess you could always just emulate it if you wanted to. Anyway, I'm the Dark Master. This is a good game. I recommend you buy it, and join me next time on my Dark Master reviews. Subscribe if you like the video. Leave feedback. I deeply appreciate it, especially on these video game reviews, which I've never really done before in my series. And comment down below, and have a wonderful day.